Does the perfect Tonex tone model exist? Well, I think the answer to that question is yes, no, and it depends. There's so many factors involved in that. The real issue with utilizing any guitar tones, whether they're coming from a real guitar amp or some sort of digital modeler, is that there are far too many variables for any person to answer that question about a tone model or just even any guitar tone being the perfect tone. We have personal taste involved. We have the monitoring system that the end user is going to be utilizing to listen to this tone on. And we're also going to have the room that the monitoring system is going to be placed in. We have different guitars and different playing styles. So when you take into account different folks' tastes and different factors such as the instrument, monitoring environment, and monitoring system, you can see it can be a very difficult thing to narrow this down to what a perfect tone model or preset or tone may actually be. And you're going to get a different answer depending on who you ask. So is there a solution to this? And we're going to talk today in this episode 2 of A Beginner's Guide to Tonex all about the EQ function we have both in Tonex software and Tonex pedal. We're going to be using Tonex software today because it's going to be a lot easier for me to show on screen, but obviously we can make these same tweaks on Tonex pedal or make the tweaks on Tonex software and then transfer whatever tone model or preset we have tweaked onto our Tonex pedal for live use, rehearsal use, or any other use that we see fit for it. So let's dive right over to Tonex and take a look and see just how powerful the EQ on Tonex can be. And I'm hoping to dispel some myths of some folks who feel like maybe they shouldn't be using it because they're somehow destroying the tone model or altering it to maybe not make it the amp that was captured. And that's just not true. And hopefully with what I show today, you'll feel a little more confident in diving in and utilizing the EQ and maybe tweaking what you feel is a great tone model and making it perfect for yourself and your situation. All right, so here we are over in the Tonex software, and today I'm going to be using my latest tone model release, which is the Cheef-Tan Ultimate Tone Model Bundle, which is available on my website. I have a free sample of it at a link below that's on my website. I also have a free sample up on ToneNet that you can grab. I'll have the links for those below. And then I have the full Cheef-Tan Ultimate Bundle up on my website. And as you can see here on screen, this is an amp that was based on my matchless Cheef-Tan recorded through the Combo Celestion G12H75 Creamback speaker. What a beautiful combo. I'm really, really loving these. Before obtaining this matchless amp, I had never actually had a matchless amp in my collection ever. And I don't really recall playing through one in person. I'd played through some very similar amps, but once I plugged into this, man, it's amazing. And these tone models turned out really nice. Here's the bass tone of what I call the push 2. And this is on the low input, the L. So there's a kind of edge of breakup. That's on the bridge pickup. If I go to the neck pickup. So great tone there. I'm very happy with that the way it is. But here's the problem. I could give that to a different person and they play it through a completely different monitoring system and get completely different results because maybe they're using a different guitar with higher output or lower output pickups or humbuckers versus single coils, or maybe they're playing through an FR style speaker that's just very boomy and muddy sounding, or maybe too bright. So there is no accounting for a person's tastes, and the end results they're going to get simply because of their environment that they're in, the room they're in, the monitoring system that they're in, their playing style, and their tastes, as I mentioned before. So how can we get around this? Well, what's interesting on Tonex, and this was a good example because I chose a skin here that I just like the look of for this matchless amp, but some of these skins only show us very basic controls on the front: gain, bass, middle, treble, volume. That doesn't give us an accurate picture of what Tonex software is capable of as far as tweakability. We need to go up to the advanced parameters here and pull this down. Now, you will see that the bass, middle, and treble controls here are mirroring the advanced controls. When I move the advanced controls, the bass moves, the treble moves, the mids move. But we have far more control in the advanced parameters. If we just came up and utilized the bass control, we don't realize that this bass frequency can actually be changed. So we can alter the behavior of the bass, the middle, and the treble control using the bass frequency, treble frequency, mid frequency, and mid Q. So very, very powerful stuff here. We also have a presence and depth control, which is not on the front of this amp either. Now, certain other amp skins do have all of these controls on it. So it really depends on what skin is chosen. But it's a very important thing to know, because at face value, if somebody never pulls down the advanced parameters, they think, well, I'm stuck with just controlling these parameters, and maybe you don't like what the bass is doing and you don't realize that you can actually come up here and change the frequency that it's working on. So what do we have here? Well, very important to understand that the bass and treble frequencies on Tonex are shelf EQs. So when we set the frequency, for instance, this is set by default at 2000 hertz. If I boost this up, I am boosting all the frequencies above that, much like the EQ is called, like a shelf. So it's going to boost them all the same amount. So basically, starting at this 2000 hertz, it's going to have a slope moving up and then a straight sort of shelf across that's boosting all of those frequencies. Same with if I cut those frequencies. So I could say, well, you know what? I don't want to boost everything above 2000. I want to boost everything above 1000. We can go all the way down to 1000 and all the way up to 4000. So we can tweak that to get different results. Much like the bass frequencies, the default setting's 300 hertz, but maybe we want to boost or cut everything below 600 hertz. And again, in this shelf format. So this is a very specific style of EQ that can be very powerful and very useful. We need to understand what we're doing with it, and we need to understand that we can alter the sound of it just by using the frequency control. Now, the mid EQ is more of a parametric style bell curve EQ. So we have our boost and our cut, but we can set the frequency we want, and then we can adjust the Q, or the width of how many frequencies are going to be affected when we boost or cut. So if we come up to here to 3, we're going to have a much more narrow EQ. It's going to affect far fewer frequencies. We set the mid frequency at 450. It's going to be much more narrow. So if we bring this all the way down to 0.2, it's going to take in the 450 hertz center that we may have set, if that's where I had it. Yeah. And a lot more frequencies way on the outside, either side of that. So it can be very broad or very precise. Now, I tend to not use the parametric style mid EQ on Tonex unless there's maybe a problem. Maybe something's too muddy. I might come into this 400 hertz range and kind of bring the Q up to around 1.4 and then just tweak it back a little bit to clean up some mud if I want. But for the most part, I think a lot of folks would get the most use out of both presence, depth, treble high shelf, and bass low shelf. Now, before we move on to actually listen to what these sound like, let's talk about presence and depth. Presence is basically going to give us that sparkle to our tone. It's going to be more upper end frequency tweaks to our tone. So we're going to get more sparkle. And if we have something that has too much sparkle or too harsh, we can dial some of that out and maybe smooth the tone out a little bit more. On the depth control, we're going to be dealing more with the lower end and adding more girth and fullness to the sound. Now, keep in mind, we have post and pre. So when post is engaged, it means that this first part of the EQ is after the tone model. And this is very important. If I turn post off, the EQ is now going to be hitting the front of the tone model. You might ask what the difference is. If I'm in pre, any boosts that I make here are going to hit the front of the tone model harder and is also going to affect the gain structure of the tone model, because now we're hitting more input into the front of the amp. So if I was to just take this, crank everything to 10 to kind of get the maximum rise in input level, and we're set to pre, you're going to notice that the gain structure of the amp, there's going to be more breakup and overdrive. Notice there that it's just a little bit cleaner. Now we get more overdrive or distortion. By putting it in post, we just get more volume, but clean volume. right? So not that I would ever run it like this, but I just wanted to illustrate that. So that's very important to know, that we are actually going to be affecting the gain structure of the amp if we put this in pre. So I would probably pretty much 99% of the time be running this in post. The presence and the depth are always in post. So those are always going to be after the amp model. So adjusting these will never touch the input level, therefore affecting your gain structure of your tone model. So a lot of folks that I've talked to feel almost like they're a little bit uncomfortable with touching EQ. And there's a couple schools of thought. They think, well, no, the tone model was captured. If I touch that, then the tone model is destroyed. It's no longer the amp that was captured. And that couldn't be further from the truth. One thing we have to keep in mind is that pretty much every guitar tone we've ever heard recorded very likely has some sort of EQ manipulation after the fact. You know, it doesn't matter who you're dealing with, what guitar player, engineer, producer, or studio. You know, you set up a microphone, you try and get the best tone possible out of your rig, but then we don't really have any way of knowing whether that tone is going to work perfectly in a mix later on. So the mixing engineer oftentimes will apply EQ, sometimes subtle EQ, sometimes very overt, crazy amounts of EQ to get a certain part to work with all the other elements in a mix. And that really goes for live or studio. So the idea of having to EQ a tone after is really just a normal part of every guitar tone, or pretty much every guitar tone that we've ever heard. So it's not something we should shy away from. But some folks then don't want to touch it because they just feel intimidated. They don't really know what they're doing. So one trick that I find is really handy is to use this idea of going to extremes. Let's say we come in and we say, I want to learn what depth does. Okay, well, let's do this. One of the best ways, instead of being afraid to play with it, is start off with your tone. And then go to extremes. Bring our depth all the way down. Listen to the bottom end. Do you hear how it thins it out? The general idea of this tone model, though, is still intact. We still have the beautiful sound of the matchless amp. But it's just much thinner. Maybe we want that so that the tone works better in a mix, doesn't get in the way of a kick drum or a bass guitar. Now, that's extreme, right? Maybe we only need to bring it back a couple notches. Or maybe not at all. Well, let's go to the other extreme now. Let's crank this up. You know, what I just did there is probably way too much and won't work in a mix. That's going to get kind of muddled in the bottom end and get in the way of other elements of any mix that would have drums and bass in it. But maybe if we're just sitting in our room playing and we just want that big, beefy sound. Now, the thing about that is, and the reason I dial things in the way I do, is so that if I'm on my bridge pickup or my neck pickup, it still stays usable, right? If I was to have that depth cranked up like that and on my neck pickup, might get a little bit tubby in the bottom end. But the point being is that by going in here and not being afraid of these controls, We can listen to what they do, get a handle on what they do, and know more instinctively, maybe with a different preset or tone model, what to tweak without even having to listen. Know like, oh, I can just go to the depth and bring that back a notch, and that's going to clean things up. And that can be a very fast way to work, especially if we're in a live situation where we have to make a really quick tweak on the fly. Let's do the same thing with presence. So we're starting off with our preset here at this. Go all the way up. Again, the general idea of the tone model is still intact. This has just made it much smoother and kind of dull sounding, but smoothed it out. Maybe we need to do that if we have an overly bright monitoring system, right? So again, if you found that this was just too bright, I'm using a Telecaster style guitar. If I was using humbuckers, maybe I have to go with a slightly different setting. I could just peel that back. And it might be the perfect tweak. We can do the same thing with our shelf EQs as well. One of my favorite settings for the bass frequency is to have this set at 600. And then what I find with that is when we cut, it controls a low end, but it also controls any mud that might be in the sound. Let's do the same thing. Let's go to extremes with this. You can hear how it really thins the sound out. It's not affecting that gain structure of the amp because I have it set in post. It's also still giving me all of those beautiful nonlinear characteristics of the amp as well. Obviously, a very extreme setting. Now, let's go to the other extreme. Reset that back. We can go to the same thing here on the treble frequency. One of my favorite settings here is to go to 1000 hertz. Let's hear what that sounds like when we pull all of those frequencies out. Again, much duller, kind of more like what the presence control would do. Go to the other extreme. Again, I'm not telling anybody to go to these extremes, but I do like the setting of 600 hertz on the bass frequency, 1000 hertz. I wish this actually kind of went down lower to the 650 level. I really do like that setting when both are set the same. It allows us a really nice, almost tilty kind of ability to shift the tones around, and very small tweaks can go a long way. You know, if we came in here and said, well, you know, I want this to be a little less bright and a little more full, just like we did with the presence and depth. It might just be the perfect tweaks. Again, we could have done a similar thing here. One of my favorite things to do on the Tonex EQ is just that. The presence and depth control can be very, very useful for very quick tweaks. We don't have to worry about frequencies. We don't have to worry about anything other than, hey, this is my upper end, this is my lower end. You know, if I need things to be a little fatter, I can add some depth, or less fat and I can pull some depth out. I need some more sparkle, I'll add some presence, or, you know, less sparkle, I'll pull some out. Now let's go do the same thing on the mid frequency. Coming into, let's just pick a frequency, and we could do this with a whole number of frequencies. We can come in here and say, let's start with 450. Let's pull it all the way back to an extreme. Go to the other extreme. Listen to what the Q does. Narrow those frequencies down. Or include many more frequencies. You'll notice there, even though I'm very extreme on this, it just cleans up the mud. And again, we don't want to go to those extremes unless absolutely necessary, but it's just a really great way to learn about what the different frequencies do. We could sweep this to a completely different frequency and do the same thing. So if you're somebody who is a little shy, a little afraid of using EQ, the going to extremes method can be a really great icebreaker for you to get you out of your comfort zone. Try some things. You can always simply, you know, leave your preset and come back to reset it back to where it was 100%. So that, in a very large nutshell, is our EQ section, which I feel is one of the most powerful tools that we have within Tonex. So there you have it. I hope that that was a useful guide to some folks who either feel they shouldn't be using EQ or are maybe a little bit afraid of it, or were just confused as to how we could use it. I hope I explained that in a clear fashion. I really do hope that that's helpful for you. So the great thing about that is, instead of just maybe getting a tone model, maybe it's a factory tone model was included in Tonex and writing it off thinking it was no good, maybe with those tweaks, we can actually make something that at first glance seemed unusable much more usable, and maybe even perfect for what we want to do. I really try to dial my tone models in so they're quite usable straight away, but again, I don't really know what guitar, what monitoring system, what monitoring environment, or the tastes of the end user. So I try to get something that's going to be a nice middle ground that the end user can then massage and tweak utilizing the powerful EQ functions, but we do have to understand how they work and what they do to get the best results out of it. So I hope that that was helpful. I'm going to leave you today with the full audio mix demo of a piece of music I wrote to showcase my Cheef-Tan Ultimate tone models. The links are below to both the free sample version and the full blown bundle if you are so inclined and want to help support my channel so I can keep bringing educational videos like this to all the folks who've told me they're really enjoying it. Thank you guys so much for your kind words about the videos. And it really makes me happy to know that they are helping a lot of folks to get the most out of their Tonex software and Tonex pedals. So the links are below if you are so inclined, and I will leave you with this audio demo. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Please like the video and share it with anybody you think would get some use or enjoyment out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I will be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in. Ciao for now.